In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the high pressure power steering feed line that goes from the pump to the steering rack on this Toyota 4Runner. Let's get started. Use a 21mm socket, remove all 6 of your lug nuts, and then take the wheel off. Now with the wheel off, I'm going to remove this outer tie rod. You may not have to, but in my opinion, it will make things a lot easier because we'll have clear access through here. So take a wrench. I believe this is a 27mm, but I don't have an actual wrench that's that big, so I'm using an adjustable. And you want to break this free. A lot of times it'll be seized on here, so you may have to use some heat. Once that's broken free, move to the cotter pin, remove it. Pull that out, throw it away, don't reuse it. Take a 19mm socket and remove the castle nut. You don't have to take it off all the way. Leave it on a few threads so that once we tap the knuckle with our hammer, the tie rod doesn't just come flying off of here. Having said that, hit it right here. Try not to damage the tie rod and accidentally hit it. There we go, that popped free. Remove the rest of the nut, remove the nut the rest of the way, pull this down, and now take the tie rod out, but count the amount of turns that it takes to remove it because you want to put it back the same amount. You will need an alignment after this, but this will at least get you close. It's 19 for me, of course for you it'll be different. Now we have to unbolt the steering rack so we can pull it away so we can get to the lines. I'm going to start on the passenger side. There's a bracket that's held on with a 19mm nut and a 19mm bolt. Take both of these out. There's the bolt. And there's the nut. One thing I want to mention is as you pull this bracket off, sometimes you might need a pry bar for this, but these two shanks here are different sizes. The lower one that goes on the nut side is longer. The top one that gets the bolt put through it is shorter. So you want to make sure you put those back the right way. Otherwise, if you put the shorter one on the bottom, the nut will bottom out on the threads before it actually gets tightened. Next, we have a bolt that is kind of hidden. You can get it from the top here. You'll see the threads at the bottom. It's a 19mm, and you'll need a swivel head long ratchet to get to it. It's pretty much the only way you'll get it. You'll have to go between the sway bar and the transmission pan. There we go. These are pretty tight, which is why I said you'll need a long ratchet. And once you have it broken free, sometimes you can switch to a shorter ratchet. This is actually so loose that I can just probably take it out by hand. Yeah. There's the bolt. On the driver's side, you'll see a 22mm nut. This is actually a bolt that goes all the way through the frame. You may or may not have to hold the head of it, which you can reach just on the other side right here. I'm going to try not to, but if it starts spinning in place, I'll have to hold it with a 22mm wrench. Okay, looks like mine stayed in place. The nut came off, that's perfect. Push the bolt through. There is a washer that sits here, so make sure you save that. Now with a pry bar, gently try and pry this away. Make sure you don't bend your skid plate. Sometimes you can get into this bushing here where the bolt comes in from up top, and just be careful what you're prying on. You don't want to damage other components that are in the way, and you're not going to be able to pull it off completely because of course the lines are still connected, but this is why we're pulling it off, so we can get to those lines. As you can see, they're pretty jammed in there. So at this point, You can pull the steering rack back. I'm going to want to get this bolt out of the steering rack. You can just reach up through here and pull it out that way towards the front of the vehicle. And then this can move around, pull it back just enough. It'll come out of this bushing in the middle. I have some pieces of wood laying around here. These are going to be perfect for me to keep this spaced off of the frame. I'm going to put them in here and just stack them. This will keep it away so that we can get to these lines up here much easier. Now, yes, this is going to move around, but this is basically the only way we're going to be able to do it. We can spin this line off freely. Okay, now I can spin it by hand. Some fluid may drip out of here as soon as this comes out. This one is significantly rustier, so hopefully it breaks free. And I'm also using a 17mm flare nut wrench on this one, just like we used on the other one. At this point, the line and the fitting here for the pressure side is completely seized. The threads are broken free, but the line is seized to the fitting. So I'm just going to cut it off. When you cut it off, if you're using a reciprocating saw, just be careful. If you're using a hand saw, it'll take a little bit longer, but you have less of a chance of hitting other things. So whatever you're using, just be careful. Next, I want to remove the front skid shield. It's held on by 4, should be 12mm bolts. I think someone's replaced mine because I have to use a 1/2-inch socket, but take them all off. The 2 rear ones are going to be a little bit longer, so just keep that in mind for when you reinstall. And 2 at the front. These 2 are going to be way shorter. When you take this last one out, it's not going to fall down. It has a few hooks that it sits on, so you don't have to hold it. And now pull it forward to unhook it from the back. Now with the skid shield off, you can see the lines here. There are 3 of these brackets that we have to disconnect, or unbolt actually, in order to separate the 2 lines. This is the one that's out in the open here, so I'm going to start with this one. There's a 10mm screw going right through the middle of it. A lot of times these break. I did spray it down with rust penetrant, but that doesn't guarantee that it won't break. Looks like mine is actually unthreading, which is good news, but if yours don't, you're going to want to make sure you have something to resecure these lines with, whether it's a new bracket or something that you can, well, secure them with. You don't want them flopping around here. I'm going to use some pliers to hold the back side. As you can see, this is a 2-piece bracket, and the back is now spinning because the threads of the bolt are kind of seized into it. All right, take the screw out, take this out. Now you can push this one up a little bit. It's still bolted onto the frame, but if you just move it out of the way a little bit, you'll have space. Take the rubber grommets off, and the other piece will most likely fall off. If you follow the lines towards the driver's side, you'll see that on the frame, there's another bracket that looks the same with a 10mm bolt or screw actually going right through it. So let's do the same thing. Unscrew that and loosen up the bracket. Take this off. Take this off. Okay, this is the line. Is it? Yeah. This is the line that we're after. Now at the bottom of the power steering reservoir, which is this, you'll see the power steering pump. And here is the other end of our pressure line. It's going to have a sensor connected to it. This is just a single wire sensor. If you grab onto the connector, there's going to be a little locking tab on the back side. Try to squeeze that. A lot of times they're a little stuck on there, but there we go. pull that away. We have to remove the sensor to transfer it over to the new one. You can use a 19mm socket. That'll fit perfectly over this cutout on the sensor. Break it free and loosen it up. Once you break it free, you might be able to take it out by hand. There it is. Set it aside safely because you don't want to damage it or get debris inside of it. We will have to reuse it. Now grab a 17mm socket and put it right on this banjo fitting here, the banjo bolt for the fitting. And we'll have to break that free. There we go. The line wants to spin with it, but you're going to have to hold it. I'm going to put a 24mm wrench on this fitting here because what's happening is the banjo bolt with the fitting are unthreading themselves off of the pump, but I want to break the banjo bolt free off of the fitting. Now I'm going to tighten this fitting back up here, or the adapter, just make it nice and snug with the wrench. This means we don't have to hold it anymore, and we can just use the ratchet and remove the banjo bolt. There it is. Remove the banjo bolt and save it. However, these copper gaskets here you can discard because the new line will come with 2 new ones. Now slide this down and fish it out through here. There it is. Make sure you don't spill anything on the ground. There it is. Now get the new power steering line. Be careful how you put it through here so that it doesn't get debris inside of it. Feed it through all the way. There we go. Slide this side up. Now it's reconnected to the pump. Now before you get the line on, I'm just going to wipe off this fitting here, or the adapter where the line goes onto, to make sure that there's no debris in the way. Next, grab your line. Your new line should have come with some copper washers. Slide the first one onto the banjo bolt. Then slide the banjo bolt through the line. I can pull it up here. Slide the banjo bolt through the line, hold it in place, put the other washer on the other side. So you basically want to sandwich this line in between the 2 copper washers. And then you want to carefully start this line on, or the banjo bolt with the line. All right, I got that started. Let's grab the ratchet and tighten it up. Okay, that's bottomed out right there. To tighten it properly, you just want to turn it about 1/4 of a turn, maybe a little more than that. Basically, you just want to crush those copper washers a little bit. That's what's going to create your seal. So this was about 1/8 of a turn. I'll go another 1/8 right there, and that feels pretty tight. That's a total of 1/4 of a turn. I would not go past that because then you will over tighten it. But that should be good. Let's get the pressure sensor reinstalled. This is the pressure sensor. It has an O-ring on the threads here. If yours was already leaking, or you notice that even though it wasn't, the O-ring is cracked or damaged, replace it, otherwise it will leak. Mine is not, so I'm going to reuse it. And because this has an O-ring, the seal is not going to be made by how tight you tighten this. You just want to snug it. The O-ring will do the job. If you over tighten it, not only could you damage the threads, but you could damage the O-ring, and then it won't seal. So thread it back into the line here. Just bottom it out by hand. And then just take your 19mm socket that you used to remove it and give it a quick snug. So that's bottomed out right there. And I'll just go a little extra. And that's it. That's where you want to stop. And don't forget to plug it back in. Perfect. Now let's put this one back on. Just make sure both of these rubber pieces line up. Clip the bracket on and start in the mounting screw. This one will be a little tricky to get started just because the bracket's going to want to come off of here as you hold it. But there we go, I got it started. Tighten this up. Last bracket, which is the one on the driver's side frame. Try to get these lines to line up. The low pressure return line goes on the top there. Get these rubber bushings lined up, and then the pressure line goes on the bottom. Okay, snug, nice and tight. When we put this front shield on, you'll see this little hook on the rear shield. It slides into this slot on the front shield. So line that up. The shield has to be pretty much pressed up all the way in order for those to line up. And then once you line that one up, you should be able to press it back enough to line up the front hooks, which is going to be a little tricky. There we go. Give it a little push and they'll pop into place. Now this is somewhat secured. The two shorter bolts went in the front. I'm just going to start these by hand, then I'll come back and tighten them up. Okay, and the two long ones went in the back. They have a little cutout right in here, and they actually bolt into the rear shield. Okay, let's snug these up. Perfect. Now let's put on the lower hose. Try to line it up the best you can. This might be a little bit difficult because, as you can see, the line and the rack are at two different angles. So one thing I want to try is pushing this large bolt through and actually putting it into the steering rack. Although I don't want to push the steering rack all the way in, I want to pull it out as far as it'll go, because I'm hoping this bolt will actually help us line up the line and the rack the way they're meant to sit. So with that in, let's try again. Like I said, this will be the most challenging part. I can get my stubby wrench now. Okay, I'm pretty sure I got it started. It's threading on nice and smooth. Took a little bit, but like I said, the key here is to line it up perfectly, otherwise the threads will never start. And once they do, this rack being aluminum, it is very important to not cross thread, because it is actually easy to cross thread aluminum, and if you don't pay attention, you won't even know. Make sure that when you spin it like this, the line itself doesn't twist. I'm going to hold it with a pry bar very gently. I don't want to bend it or damage it in any way, but I just want to prevent it from spinning so I can just spin the fitting, not the line with it. Okay, just give it a good snug here. Okay, perfect, just like that. Let's put the rack back in. I'm going to start by putting in the center bolt because this centers everything up. So push it in and then drop the bolt down from up top. This one, you won't be able to see much of what's happening there, so you kind of have to feel for it. However, once it falls through, you should be able to smoothly thread it on, and you'll see it poke out through the bottom once the threads get in there and start catching on. There we go. We'll just bottom that out. And this one does have a torque, but I will not be able to torque this because my torque wrench doesn't fit in there. So I will only be torquing these, just so you know. Now, let's push this large bolt through all the way. Remember, this had a washer and then the mounting nut. This was the 22mm mounting nut. if this line is in the way, you can kind of bend it up just a little bit. It won't hurt anything, but you definitely would, but you're better off bending it up out of the way a little bit than rubbing your socket on it and potentially damaging it. Okay, this is on. Not going to tighten this yet. Let's put the other side on. Don't forget to transfer over your old rubber bushing here. Obviously, if you have a new one, just use that. I put silicone paste on the inside to prevent water from building up in there and rotting out the steering rack. A lot of times this happens. Our old rack was actually pretty severely pitted here. So put on some silicone paste if you have some. And I prefer to put the slit at the bottom. That way any moisture or debris that gets in there can just drip right down. And you want to slide this behind the rack, line it up with the bracket on the frame here, just like so. All right, there we go, perfect. And now I actually added some silicone paste to the outside as well, because that will allow us to slide this bracket on a lot easier. It'll kind of just glide over the rubber piece, just like that. The bolt goes on the top, and remember, the longer shank was on the bottom. Just a little reminder. Line up the bolt, make sure it threads in, then take the nut, put that on the bottom, and now let's bottom everything out and torque it. 22 millimeter for this one. Most of the time you won't have to hold the bolt, but if you do, just put a wrench on the backside. You'll have access to it right there. And now the 19 millimeter bolt that goes from the top. Again, I will not be torquing this one just because I don't have a torque wrench that fits in here. So I'm just going to make it as tight as I can. I'd say that's pretty tight right there. I had some good leverage with this ratchet, so that's done. 96 foot-pounds is the torque for this large through bolt here. Okay, looks like mine is spinning on the backside, so I'll have to put a wrench on it. I'm holding the bolt from the backside. $96 right there, perfect. Let's move on to the bracket. $123 for both of these, the nut and the bolt. That's one. No extension needed for that top one. And that's two. And technically, the bolt in the middle was also 123, but like I said, can't torque that one. Now let's reconnect the tie rod. I always recommend putting a little bit of anti-seize on the threads here so that the tie rod threads don't seize into each other. And now take your tie rod and thread it on the same amount of turns that it took to take it off. That's 19 for me, that's how many I had, but of course for you it's going to be different. Get the jam nut close, don't tighten it yet. Let's put the tie rod into the knuckle. Grab the tie rod stud and slide it through the knuckle. Move the knuckle around if needed to line this up. There we go. Put the mounting nut on. Let's tighten it up. And torque it to 67 foot-pounds. That's 67 right there. However, what you need to do is line up the slot in the castle nut with the hole for the cotter pin. It looks like mine actually lines up, so I'm just going to slide a new cotter pin through. Never reuse your old ones. Slide your cotter pin through and bend it over to lock it in. Let's lock the jam nut in. That's it right there, just make it snug, and then I like to actually bring this back so that the end of the tie rod is not sitting at a severe angle, it's parallel with the knuckle. Let's put the wheel on, put on all 6 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and torque them to 76 foot-pounds. Torque them to 76 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Now it's time to fill the system. This is your power steering reservoir on the passenger side of the engine, right by the radiator. Take the cap off. You'll notice that right on the cap it says to use Dexron type automatic transmission fluid. Do not use power steering fluid for this. If you absolutely have to, you can, but flush it out later. This being a steel reservoir, it's a little bit difficult to see, so I'm just going to look from the top and fill it almost to the top, but not all the way, because otherwise it will spill as we bleed it. I'm going to use a funnel, that way I avoid making a mess. The system is not going to take a whole lot. I would be surprised if it takes more than a whole quart to fill up, so just keep that in mind. Now that we have it almost full, I'm going to raise the vehicle up so the front wheels are slightly off the ground, and we're going to turn the steering wheel lock to lock, meaning all the way from one side to all the way to the other side with the engine off. This will manually push the air out of the system and the fluid through, and we'll top it off as needed. Now, like I said, turn the steering wheel lock to lock, meaning all the way to one side and all the way to the other side, and this will bleed the system manually. Now, we will do this with the engine on later, but I want to make sure that the air comes out with the engine off. Otherwise, the power steering pump is going to suck in a lot of air, aerate the fluid, and potentially damage the pump. Another thing to note here is this is exactly why I jacked up the vehicle. Well, mine's on the lift, so I just lifted it, but you want the front wheels off the ground so you can easily spin them. Otherwise, you'll be fighting the pressure of the weight of the vehicle on the wheels, which, well, if you can make this easier, why not? I'm just going to do this a few more times, then we will go check the level of the fluid. Most likely it will have gone down, and we'll add accordingly. The reservoir is completely empty now, so I'm just going to add more fluid to it, bring it up to the top, just like it was before. Okay, that's pretty full, so let's do the procedure again. I'm just going to keep doing this until air stops coming out and fluid stops going down. That's when I know that manually I've done everything I could, so it's time to start the engine. Now that it's bled manually, top it off if it isn't already, and turn on the engine and do the same exact thing. Just keep turning the steering wheel left and right all the way until air bubbles stop coming out. Then, once it's time to cap it off because you're done, this is also your dipstick to check the level. On one side, it'll say hot. That's where it will be when the fluid is hot. It does expand a little bit. And on the other side, it's a cold fill. You can use either of them, but most likely if you already ran it, it'll be on the hot side. Make sure the fluid level is between the two ends of these marks. If it is, that's perfect. If it's too high, just take some out. If it's too low, well, add some. At that point, once you have it filled perfectly, cap it off. You can take it for a road test to your local alignment shop.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.